Hi. Dr. Shin has invited me to talk about the 5th century BC in Greece, one of the golden ages of the world's history. And this includes the age of Pericles, probably Koreans say very well, because generally Koreans pronounce these Greek names correctly, and we in English mispronounce them. So Pericles, I'm sure you say. Okay, but first generally the 5th century BC, which is so astonishing, so inspiring. At the beginning of the 5th century BC, now BCE we are supposed to say, this has changed, BCE, no longer BC, and later no longer AD, but CE, Christian era. And this is official now, I've seen it. Okay, the 5th century BCE, before Christian era, ERA, time period. At the beginning of that century, so we're talking about, say, 495 BCE, 490, first of all, Greece was separated into many city-states. Almost none of these had much territory. They were city-states. And this was the ideal unit for the Greeks, somehow. The Greeks never managed to unite until they were united by force under Philip of Macedonia, whose son was Alexander the Great. But that comes the following century, much later. During the 5th century, we had the city-states, or the polis, P-O-L-I-S in English, which means city-state. The most outstanding of these was, of course, Athens, Athene, as you say, Athens. But the rivals of Athens were economically Corinth and militarily Sparta. So, the stage was set. Meanwhile, in the east, the Persian Empire was spreading very quickly. The Persian Empire became an empire in 539, so only 40, 50 years earlier, under Cyrus the Great, who was an amazing man. The Persian Empire continued to spread and grow after the death of Cyrus the Great. And of course, they spread westward, which means in the direction of Greece. Finally, at the end of the 6th century BCE, 510, the Persian Empire absorbed the Greek colonies on the coast of Turkey now, Asia Minor. Those colonies were Greek colonies, and they were very rich, very civilized. And they generally had good ties, good relations with Athens, Corinth, and the Greek proper world. Okay, the Persians absorbed them, and it was clear that the Persians very soon would attack Greece itself. This happened finally in 490. In 490, the emperor was Darius, and he sent an army, not a very large one as it turned out, to invade Greece. This was the time of the Battle of Marathon. Marathon. Very famous, a couple of very famous battles in any case. And fortunately, the Greeks, Athens and Sparta, were able to unite and fight together against the common enemy. Now, that didn't happen very often, and it's a little bit surprising, a kind of miracle, really. But the Spartans were able to defeat somewhat the Persian army in one place, doesn't matter where, and the Athenians were able to defeat the Persians decisively at the Battle of Marathon. Militarily, this was the high point of Athenian history, maybe even Greek history. Because what we have there was a Persian army of 22,000 and a Greek army of 10,000, mostly Athenians. So the Persians far outnumbered the Greeks. But because the Greeks fought with light armor, and they fought well with this light armor, they defeated the Persians tremendously. I think maybe 6,000 Persians were dead, 192 Greeks dead. 192. Wow. So the Persians were routed, and the ones who could escape escaped. That was the end of the threat, the first threat. 10 years later, the Persians sent another army. This time the new emperor was Xerxes. Xerxes, maybe, something like that. This time he sent a much larger army, and he sent a larger navy. This time the battles lasted 2 years, well, really 2 seasons, let's say, because the Persian army invaded Attica, which is the area where Athens is. The Athenians abandoned their city, abandoned Attica, and the Persians came in and spent the winter there. They burned and looted everything. But Athens was not yet the richest, greatest city that it would soon become. But in the spring, when battle started again, the Greeks, the Athenians especially, completely defeated the Persians at Plataea and Salamis, I think, are the names of the 2 battles, doesn't matter. And once again, the Greeks were victorious. This time, the Greeks decided, especially the Athenians, decided to counterattack. That is, they decided they had defeated these Persians, who had an empire the size of China. Why not make an empire for themselves? So, slowly over this was 479 now. First battles, 490. Second battles, 480, 479, 10 years later. During the next 15 years, the Athenians created what was called the Delian League, D-E-L-I-A-N, based on Delos, famous little island in the Aegean Sea. Delos was famous because, although it was small, it was sacred because Apollo and Artemis were said to have been born there. Okay, so the Delian League was created. Athens was the strongest member of it, but Athens invited and then gradually forced many smaller Greek communities to join the Delian League. And then the Athenians invited and then gradually forced these other countries, cities, to pay dues, to pay money into the treasury on Delos. But something big happened in 465. In 465, the Athenians decided to move the treasury from Delos, the little island, to Athens. That was a lot of money. And who was going to stop them? No one. This is kind of the beginning of Greek, of Athenian, what should we say? Bullying. Bullying, to bully. To use of compulsion, use of force. Okay. Soon after that, they started to build the Parthenon. And you have all seen pictures of the Parthenon, Parthenon maybe, the temple sacred to Athena, who was the goddess of Athens, Athena. And along with the Parthenon, the whole complex or set of buildings up on top of the Acropolis in Athens, one of the most beautiful places in the world before, and really it still is. So really the Athenians were using other people's money to make this, to enter into this building, expensive building program. On the other hand, the beauty of these places, places of such beauty had never been created before by human beings. The Egyptians were very good at building big places, but the subtle, gentle, exquisite, delicate beauty of the Greek architecture and Greek art on the Acropolis had never been seen before, and maybe has never been seen since. Now, in 461 begins the first Peloponnesian War, because the rivalry between Athens and Sparta was growing. Sparta didn't trust Athens, and they were right. Sparta was always ready for war. You could almost compare Sparta to North Korea a little bit. That is, it existed for war. On the other hand, it didn't seek wars. It was not aggressive in the sense of conquering. So the Spartans never really wanted to conquer and control other people, but they were always ready for war. A militaristic way of life. Famous. Not pretty, not pleasant, but impressive. Kind of like the North Koreans. Okay. So, the first Peloponnesian War, Peloponnese, the area in southern Greece there, where Sparta is, lasted from 461 to 445. That's 16 years. Does that mean they were fighting all the time? No. They weren't fighting all the time, and both sides had allies, and at the end of 16 years, they signed a treaty, peace treaty. That was the end of that first war. Peace for the next 15 years, and then it started again in 431. Now, the age of Pericles, what a man, one of the great men of history. Here was a leader of a democracy, because Athens was a democracy. In what sense was Athens a democracy? Not in the modern sense of the word. Why? Because, for example, in Athens, there were 30,000 citizens and 90,000 slaves. Did women vote? No, of course not. Only people who owned some property voted. That was a citizen. So this was a democracy in a very limited sense of the word, but still, it was a democracy. That is, people elected their officials, their leaders, and if they didn't like them, they could change. Pericles was the leader of Athens during the period from about 455, my dates may be wrong here, to 429. In 429 he died. So that's 25 years. I may be a little wrong there, but not much. That meant that not only was he the leader, but the Athenians continued to choose him as their leader under very difficult conditions, because partly this was war. But Pericles was so civilized, so intelligent, so idealistic, really, about Athens and its way. He was the leader of the building of the Parthenon and of all the buildings on the construction of most of the buildings on the Acropolis. He was the one who had the Athenians build their wall to protect them, and that wall was key to their defense. No Spartan army at least could have broken through that wall. But he built the walls all the way down to the sea, because you must remember that Athens was not on the sea. Athens was 10 miles inland. Very strange. Nowadays, of course, Athens extends all the way to the sea. Uh, Piraeus is still the name of the town along the sea, but it's part of Athens now and has been for 200 years. But in those days, Athens and Piraeus were separate, but Pericles had the good idea to build the wall all the way to the sea so that the Athenians were protected and could always get to their ships. Because the strength of Athens was its navy. The strength of Athens was its ships. And that's why the Spartans, who were such strong fighters on land, could not defeat them. Because always they had their ships, always they could get food and supplies, and they had their walls. So Pericles was a remarkable man. Now, in 431, the Second Peloponnesian War began, and it lasted until 404. 404 or 403. 403, let's say. So it lasted for 28 years. But this time things did not go well for Athens. The main event was in 415 when Athens sent a huge army and navy to Sicilia, to conquer Sicily. This was a huge mistake. They lost all the ships, most of the men. At that point, everyone knew that Athens would lose this war. But still, 415, 403, still they kept the war going for 12 more years. Finally, exhausted in 403, Athens surrendered and the Spartans took over. But as I said before, the Spartans did not want to control Athens. I think the story I will tell now is about the death of Socrates. Since we're right there. In 403 then, the Athenian democracy surrendered and the Spartans took power. They put what is called an oligarchy, in power in Athens, and then the Spartans left. They didn't want to stay there. An oligarchy means rule or power by a group of few people, a few men. Now, the oligarchy, many of whom were friends and relatives of Platon, then proceeded to arrest and basically kill many of their enemies, who were Democrats, that is, friends of democracy. The oligarchy caused a lot of trouble for about 2 years, until 401, the final year of the 5th century BC, 401 BCE. In that year, the oligarchy lost power, and the democracy took over again. Now, the people in the democracy decided to punish the oligarchs and their friends. And among the people whom they decided to punish was Socrates. Why? Socrates, we say. Why? Because they thought that Socrates was close friends with the oligarchs and their families. Now, this is generally true. Socrates had many friends among the oligarchs, those families of a lot of money and power. Socrates was a poor man, but they loved him. The wealthy and well-educated loved him. Some others loved him too, but especially the wealthy and very well-educated loved him and admired him and protected him. So when the Democrats took power in 401, they arrested Socrates. They put him on trial in 399. His judges were 500 citizens. And the Apologia probably, one of Plato's early works, tells the story of the trial, Trial, of Socrates. In that trial, first Socrates defends himself. He's very sarcastic and ironic. He's not friendly at all. And he certainly does not beg for... So, in his first speech, Socrates, and in his second speech, he is very unconciliatory, very abrasive. That is, he was not friendly, he wasn't even polite to his accusers. His attitude was the following: I'm innocent, you know I'm innocent, all this is a joke, this trial is a joke, why don't we just go home and forget this? By the way, he was charged with introducing new gods and, let's say, discrediting, attacking maybe, the traditional gods. Well, even this is partly true. Plato, in his works, in which Socrates always appears, treats Socrates as if he did respect the gods, especially Apollo. But I think all of that is a game. Socrates did not take seriously the conventional public religion of his time. But anyway, so Socrates defended himself, then the citizens, 500, voted, and the vote was close. That's the biggest surprise of all. That is, the vote was about maybe 280 to 220, 40-40. That's quite close. That is, 220 people said he's innocent. Amazing. Still, the decision was against him. So then he spoke, he had a second speech. In the second speech, he was supposed to suggest his punishment, his own punishment. Now, most people would suggest banishment, that is, send me away for a while, or maybe a fine, pay some money. Socrates suggests that he pay some very small fine, and he's very sarcastic about that too. Then finally the vote is that he should be put to death. By the way, even this was not serious. No one expected Socrates to be put to death. It was common for people, especially people who had wealthy friends, that they would bribe the prison keepers, they would escape, nothing big, and they would go live abroad. And in one of Plato's dialogues, called the Critias, Plato's friend and Socrates' friend, offers to liberate Socrates, and Socrates says no, for some, I think, kind of silly reasons. In other words, there's a similarity, really, between Socrates and, who am I thinking of? Oh, Antigone, in the tragedy by Sophocles. That is, both of them, I think, had already chosen to die for very different reasons. Antigone, in her case, is just exhausted and has seen too much. She's ready to die, though at the end she kind of whimpers and cries and changes her mind a little bit. And in the very end, she commits suicide in her little outdoor prison. Socrates, according to Plato in the Phaedo, one of the most moving of all Plato's works, which tells the story of the death of Socrates. Socrates has chosen to die for philosophical reasons because he believes in the immortality of the soul. He believes in an afterlife. He believes that the philosopher, the true philosopher, will basically join the gods and other philosophers and spend eternity with the gods and the other philosophers. That is, he decides to die because death is preferable to living. Because he hates life? No, he doesn't hate life at all. He is simply convinced that in death he will be in better company, maybe. Anyway, now, to back up a little bit. because I want to talk more about the 5th century BC and why it's so great. It's not great so much for the reasons I have stated so far, except for the Parthenon, maybe, and Pericles, and Socrates, okay, and Socrates. Let's talk about who some of the great people who lived in Greece, specifically in Athens, during that 5th century. In Athens, Sophocles, whom I've mentioned already, Sophocles we call him. Sophocles was born in 496 and he died in 406, so he lived to be 90. And his final play was produced in 406, or even the year after his death, 405. What a guy. He was the greatest of the playwrights, the Athenians thought anyway. He won first prize. Every year the Athenians held a drama contest, tragedy contest and comedy contest, separate times. And 4 playwrights in the tragedy contest would submit, each of them, 4 plays. 1, 2, 3 tragedies, trilogy, and 1 satire or satyr play, which was a comedy. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 playwrights would submit these 4 plays, and the judges would choose first place, second place, third prize. First prize, second prize, third prize. Sophocles won first prize 24 times. That means 24 times 3, let's say, tragedies. 72 tragedies, if you like, separately, won first prize. Incredible. Incredible. He won second prize a couple of times. He never won third prize. Incredible. Now, only 7 plays of his survive, of which the most famous are Oedipus, the king, Oedipus at Kolonos, Antigone, which I've mentioned already, and 4 others. The second of the great playwrights was Euripides, I guess. He was born in 476, died also in 406. Now, he only won first prize, I think, twice. But his attitude toward the public was similar to that of Socrates in his trial. That is, often he would almost mock his audience. He never tried to flatter them very much, as if to say, "Oh, you Athenians are wonderful, give me first prize." He never did that. He was an intellectual, Sophocles too, and he I think he was probably an agnostic, that is, or skeptic. Maybe skeptic is the better word for him. That is, he was skeptical about the gods and traditional religion, or agnostic. He believed that he didn't know, and probably no one truly knows, has knowledge about the gods. 19 of his plays survive. Euripides now, 19, only 7 of Sophocles. But that's because the people who kept these plays in Alexandria, in northern Egypt, Greek city, admired Euripides a little more. So tastes change, of course. The third of the great writers of the plays of tragedy is the one who actually came first. Aeschylus we say, Aeschylus, 525, so the previous century, 525 to 452. He was kind of the pioneer. That is, he was the first playwright. Playwright is spelled Playwright, writer of plays. He was the first playwright who developed, beyond the chorus and the chorus leader, another character. Then Sophocles later added a second other character. So in the beginning we had only the chorus. Then the chorus leader, so that the leader and the chorus could have a dialogue. Then a separate character so that chorus leader, chorus, and character could have conversations. Then Sophocles added yet another character, so two characters, chorus leader and chorus. And that's where drama was at the end of the 5th century BC. Aeschylus is most famous for the trilogy, the only trilogy which survives, called the Oresteia. And this is great, great, great. It consists of 3 plays, trilogy. First, the Agamemnon, about the death of Agamemnon when he returned from the Trojan War. He was killed by his wife, who hated him because he had sacrificed their daughter before the war. He deserved to be killed. Second play and third plays don't matter for us right now. They're too difficult to discuss. So, this Age of Gold, then, this 5th century BC, Pericles, okay. The makers of the Parthenon, I should mention that. The main sculptor was Phidias. He is the sculptor who created the sculptures in the pediment, as it's called, at the end of the Parthenon. He was the king of sculptors late in the 5th century BCE. Many other famous sculptors and artists worked, though, on the Parthenon. So it was a great time for artists. By the way, no Greek painting survives, but the Greeks thought that their painters and their musicians were the greatest of all their artists. Of course, their music doesn't survive, and none of their paintings survive either, except the ones on the vases, the little cups and bowls and things like that. But these were minor painters, not great painters. We think of them as great. But their mural painters on walls, they thought were even better. And their musicians, even better. These don't survive at all. Wow. They must have been pretty good. Okay, other great art forms then. Socrates, of course, philosophy. The first really, maybe, great philosopher, but he wrote nothing, of course. What we know about him is limited almost to Plato. But Plato was born in 427. So the first 27 years of his life were spent during the 5th century, but that's ridiculous. He was still a young man. He wrote nothing. Plato belongs to the 4th century BCE. But he was growing up then, and he was related to Pericles, too. Pericles. Okay. I mentioned the vase painters. Non-dramatic poet, Pindar. Pindar's dates are similar to those of Aeschylus, that is, I think about 510 to 440, I'm guessing here. He was a master of lyric poetry, but only some of his work survives, a small portion of it, but wow, what a guy. He was not from Athens, though. He was not Athenian. All these other people were from Athens. Oh, Hippocrates, father of medicine, in Athens anyway. The sophists, sophists, were traveling teachers, and they had a lot to do with the excitement of being in Athens at that time. They all came to Athens because Athens was rich, good place to go. And they taught, and they spread ideas and excitement. People think of the sophists as kind of bad guys. They were often skeptics, and Plato disliked them a lot. But they were intelligent, and they were important to the intellectual excitement of 5th century Athens. Forgetting some guys. Just a minute. Other guys. Sorry. 5th century Athens, Pericles, the Parthenon, the philosophers, the dramatists, medicine even, historians. The greatest of the historians from Athens was Thucydides. Thucydides, maybe you say, because that's Greek. He wrote about the Second Peloponnesian War. What an intelligent man. He used to be called, he's one of the fathers of history. Not really, but he was so intelligent, so analytical, analyze, such an analytical intelligence, and he criticized the Athenians, his own people, for the mistakes they made. He wrote about the final fall of Athens, and he gave his ideas about why Athens lost the war. Very intelligent, great author. I've never studied him really, but he's the only one of these guys whom I have never studied. But very impressive anyway. Music, painting, or speaking, public speaking. Democritus, what's his name? Democritus became a great speaker, and the Greeks were very concerned about public speaking. In fact, the sophistes, the main thing they were supposed to teach was public speech, public speaking, because rich men would pay them to teach them how to be successful. And that's what Plato didn't like about them, because they were only concerned with material success. And Plato was concerned with, and wanted people to be concerned with, wisdom, and with their immortal souls, and with eternity, and with truth, and justice, the big ideas. So Plato, in a way, subsumes and takes up all of that great 5th century and brings it to a high level of thought and idealism, even though he doesn't belong to the 5th century. Okay, that's all I have to say about the 5th century, I guess.